Hello, welcome back to the studio. This week it's Seascapes. I used the Bob Ross classic Crimson Tide as the inspiration for my painting. From that stunning sky to the planning and layout of a wave. This is a classic shape that'll help you paint future seascapes. So nautical jokes aside, let's splice the mainsail and see if we can paint a seascape together. This week I thought we'd do a Bob Ross classic, Crimson Tide, Series 27 for the Joy of Painting again. It's one of those books which has got so many great paintings in it. It's sort of the series book I would suggest you pick up if you get a chance. And of course this, a beautiful painting, got a night scene, alizarin crimson, some phthalo blue, a smashing wave, and of course a lovely big rock. You know I like doing my rocks. And maybe we'll throw in a little surprise as well. So let's get the canvas prepped. I've got started by putting on a little piece of tape for the horizon line. It's a little bit lower than halfway, so I've allowed a lot of room for the sky. Let's get on with adding some colour, but first some liquid clear. It'll aid mixing the paint on my painting. So here's the product I'm going to get started with. Bob Ross Liquid Clear Oil Paint. As many of you know, I'm a certified Bob Ross instructor and I've been teaching this for about 25 years now, but I use these products simply because of familiarity. But if you don't have this product, you can substitute linseed oil for it. And you look at my previous painting I did just last week, you see I used linseed oil instead of this as an alternative. But I'm going to use it this week and I'm going to apply this over my entire canvas, a thin, even coat. I like to put a small amount in a little plastic dish, and I use an old Bob Ross landscape brush, one that's been well used, and it's nice and old and crunchy. I want to apply a very small amount of this to my entire canvas. Now, as I often mention, a thin, even coat is what's essential here. If we put on too much, the canvas just becomes too wet and runny. It's hard to blend colours and keep them in one place without everything sliding around. The idea is just make the canvas slightly wet, and it means that when we put alizarin crimson on and we put on some phthalo blue, we can get them to merge together, make a nice lavender colour without, well, it's just jolly hard work. And incidentally, if you look at any of Bob's really early work where he's painting on a black canvas like this, and incidentally, this is just black gesso, but you could use black acrylic. It's on my DIY paper canvas as usual. I should have mentioned that earlier, I guess. But people often ask me, they say, but Bob didn't use liquid clear on some of his paintings. And the reason why? Well, he hadn't sort of dreamt the idea of using it. This didn't come along until much later in the series Joy of Painting that Bob sort of hosted and filmed. Okay, let's carry on adding some. And I think I'm going to do just the sky. So there you go, a nice thin even coat over the entire canvas. And I've got the canvas angled back slightly so that if I run my finger over the canvas, you can see I don't leave any kind of a trail. That means there's just enough on there to make my canvas look a bit shiny. Now, let's add some colour. But first, I want to dry clean this brush. I don't want to add any more liquid clear to my painting. I want to put in a bit of paper towel. That's it, quick squeeze, quick twiddle, and it's ready to go. On my palette, I have some alizarin crimson and some phthalo blue. I'm going to use that old brush to add a little of each to my canvas. Now, load a good amount of the crimson first, and the lower section is going to be crimson, upper part is going to be phthalo blue, and where they mix it sort of does a nice sort of lavender dance. Now, as you see, this colour goes on, you can initially see it, but alizarin crimson and phthalo blue are what are known as transparent colours. In other words, as you apply it to the canvas, well, they start to disappear, they sink into the background. So how can you find out how much is there? Well, quite simply, you just have to touch your fingertips to the painting. Here you see a really lovely strong crimson colour, and that's what you're looking for. If you touch the canvas and it looks, well, let's have a quick go. If you touch the canvas and it looks more like sort of that, sort of a wishy-washy pinkish colour, then that's going to be no good at all. When you start painting on top of this, we want these colours to come through. If you have this and you put white on top, then all that happens is it sort of looks more grey, sort of pinky grey or a blue grey, but a grey tone. So we need plenty of colour. Don't skimp at this stage. And I'm not going to bother dry cleaning my brush. I'm going to go straight into the blue. because I happen to know that the blue colour, well, it's a bit of a bully. Phthalo blue, phthalo green, it will turn your painting upside down in a heartbeat. So I'll just do a little bit of brush mixing there. You can see a little bit of the lavender colour I'm hoping for. Again, I'm going to start right at the very top and lay down a good amount of paint. Okay, so let's do another little test. Clean my hands. This is where you need a baby wipe. Okay, so I've got blue, I should have lavender, and I should have crimson. So there we go, blue, purple, and crimson. So I've got a really nice mixture of colours along here. As I say, I'm just going to do the sky to start with, and I want to do some lovely bright colour down here in the lower section first, and paint some nice clouds, sort of blending away from that into all these great colours. So let's get some titanium white onto the palette. Okay, I've added some titanium white to my palette, and I got myself a nice soft fresh brush to work with, and I want to just put a little bit of paint just on the corner of my brush. I want to just swirl in a nice bright spot. There we go, and give it a little tap. Really work that paint down into the bristles of the brush. Now, kind of further back in my painting, sort of off to the right a little bit, because I've got a nice rock coming in here. I want to work into a lovely bit of a bright area just in here. Hang about. That's not crimson. That's yellow. I didn't put any yellow on here. Or did I? Slide that back a bit. No, that's crimson, and that's crimson. So somehow, some Indian yellow got snuck into my painting. Well, you can't always trust these artists, you know. I like to do fun little things, like surprise you with little touches like that. I hope you like my little gotcha. That's right, I just snuck in a little bit of Indian yellow here right on the horizon line, and it'll turn into a nice orangey kind of colour now. Kind of got that lovely bright effect in here, and I'm going to just sit right on the corner of my 1-inch brush, and I'm going to just twirl in some nice sort of patterns. I want to get some nice cloudy effects. Let me shift my camera over just a few inches for you. There you go. Wasn't that sneaky of me? You can't take me anywhere. So I'm picking up a little colour as I go here. Pick up a little bit more titanium white paint. Now remember, as you paint this, you're going to be picking up the lovely crimson colour, and that's obviously where the light comes from. So I want to think about painting the undersides of my clouds a little bit more. So as you're painting these, kind of think about the light coming up from underneath. So this is the underside of my clouds. Okay, and as my paint runs out, okay, then you want to think about doing maybe a little bit of the top half of the cloud. Okay. Now, I like to put these on here, kind of get them all mapped out. And then if I need to come back in, I can brighten things up a little more. And if you pick up a lot of colour, and you will pick up a lot of colour, then you can always knock some of it off. Load a little more paint. Now this isn't really quite bright enough, so I'm going to just come back in here and just swirl in a little more. There we go. And let that paint kind of blend and mix as it goes up. Now if you find the 1-inch brush a little on the big side, then change it for a smaller brush. It's going to do the underside of a lovely little lavender cloud here. Wow, look at that. Isn't that beautiful? And then I'm going to blend the top of it out. This has got to be one of those absolutely beautiful paintings, one I've enjoyed doing for a while, and I've enjoyed teaching this painting and as you see, demonstrating it as well. So I'm just going to kind of blur that out a little more. You can see how that kind of picks that colour up. So yeah, definitely using fan brush can help you. You don't have to get it all done in one go, that's for sure. But you see kind of how my light's sort of spreading away. That lovely golden start. Yeah, that's a nice gotcha. I think so. I think it's looking pretty good. It's not that, it's a little bit bright. There we go. So let's get a fan brush and come back and see if we can just play with this a little more. Okay, I dry cleaned that brush, got as much paint off as I could, and I'm going to use the fan brush to apply some more colour, and I'll do a little bit of blending as I go. So it doesn't matter if there's a little bit of colour mixed in with this titanium white, it won't hurt things. So I won't be playing down there, but just kind of on a couple of these little edges. I'm going to come back in and do a little bit of a touch up. And notice I'm just going to use the corner of my fan brush. And this is a stroke you've seen me do before, just to kind of let the brush kind of bump and swirl its way along. And you can do some crazy good little clouds, but not really trying too hard. Get these kind of amazing little edges. Yeah, let's creep down into that little orangey bit there. Just knock this off, and you don't have to do too much. You just want to add little touches, little extra details. You look around your painting. I got a little bit of yellow in there, which is really pretty. But maybe this kind of 3 lumps in here, it needs to be a little bit more refined. Let's kind of pull some colour up into there. And say, just have fun with this. You can really play. Just remember where the light's coming from. You're lighting up the bottom of these clouds, and the top of it you want to be fading away. And see, that's really bright there. Well, this is where you might want to just knock that out. Okay, just soften it up a little bit. A few little side strokes, and again, just use the side of the brush, just gently. See how it just moves enough of the paint to soften the effects down. But don't overdo that, folks, because you can just blur it all out completely. This may not be the most realistic sky. I don't care. I want this to be a fun, lovely, dramatic sky. And I don't really want to sit here and just stir it around until it gets to be some sort of boring flat colour. So I just don't get into too much fiddling with my paintings. I just let the colours flow and I have fun with it, and I walk away and move on to the next section. And that's pretty much what I'm going to do now. I'll stand back, cup of tea, and have a look at it from the other side of the room. After a little stand back, I think my sky is great. I'm going to keep it just the way it is. Now, top tip, don't forget to peel off the masking tape. Yes, somebody once forgot to do this when he was doing a painting demonstration. Never mind, they forgave me. Now, time to move on to the seascape element. And of course, for this, we'll need some more liquid clear. And yes, I give my brushes a quick wash. They sit out for any length of time, they get a bit sticky. And they're dry cleaned, and just as before, a thin coat is all we need. Now, before we go any further, I think we need to talk about something called perspective. And many of you will already know about this, but just in case you're just a newbie and you want to know what it all means, let me try and explain. I'm not an expert, but I'll do my best. Now, this is Bob's original painting that I'm working from. It's my inspiration. I want you to pay attention to the distance between the horizon line and the top of that wave. And you can see there's quite a bit of sea back there. There's lots of waves, lots of details, and you can see a lot of the beach in front of the wave. This tells me that the view is taken as though you were looking down on it from above. In other words, that you've got an eye position higher than the horizon line. As your eye line drops lower, so this wave starts to move closer to the horizon line, and you see less of the background water, and this also becomes more shallow as well, and then the wave can actually cross through the horizon line. And it gives a nice view, and the higher the wave above the horizon line, well, the lower you're getting relative to the horizon line. Does that make sense? I hope so. Because if all you could see was the wave, it means you're laying on your tummy on the ground. In other words, the wave is above your eye line. There, I hope that explains it. Clear as mud, eh? Well, let's see if we can paint it. And for my painting, I want to move my little wave a little bit higher. Now, the first thing we've got to do, of course, is to put some of the colour from our sky down into the water. And I put out some Indian yellow this time because I've already paid that gag once. But I want to put in a little touch of Indian yellow just about here on the horizon line. Now remember, my view is going to be as though I'm looking across. So however deep these colours are, they're going to be much more reduced because I want to actually get the beach in as well. But you still need a good colour. There we go. And don't worry too much if you haven't got that absolute really up close to the sky. If there's a little dark edge, don't worry. So we'll be lifting our wave up and I'll put a few little waves just in that edge there. It'll cover up nicely. And of course, it was some alizarin crimson next. And then finally, phthalo blue. And this is just going to go into this very, very lower edge of my seascape. Now, this is tricky to see because obviously you're working black on black, but let's do a little colour test. There we go. So I've got a little yellow, a little crimson, a little lavender, and whoops, down here somewhere, well, a little blue, but it looks a little watery. Need a touch more colour. One final test. That's better. Those are the sort of colours I'm looking for. Now, time to plan the position of our wave. Now, if you've seen any of my other seascapes, there's a particular shape I like to reproduce, which gives you a very good starting point for a seascape. And I'm going to do that again today. It's just a starting point and you can paint your waves any shape you like, but this is a very useful shape to remember. I've got a little fan brush here. I picked up a little bit of white paint and I'm going to draw the shape of a classic wave. Now, remember, I want to move my wave a little closer to the horizon line, and I'm going to have some nice rocks in here on the left side like Bob did. So I don't want everything to be crowded over here. So I want my wave to be sort of a little further to the right, maybe, even just above the horizon line. So let's pick a point right of centre, maybe just where that bright spot is there. And I'm going to just do a little curve. In other words, this is the crest of my wave. Okay. And the wave is travelling from right to left. So this side wants to be sort of dropping down. Okay, don't have it dropping too steeply. It looks a little bit steep on camera. My camera's sort of at a bit of an angle, so it makes it look a bit steeper. That's it. Let's level that up a little bit for you so it looks a little bit easier for the eye. Okay, and you can see how close I am to the horizon. And the other important line to remember is what's called the floor of the wave. In other words, it's where the wave would meet the beach, okay? Because we don't want our wave dropping through the bottom of the painting. So if I take a line, something like this, and I want you to notice that again, it's a slight angle. So our wave is sort of coming from the right to the left and it's crashing over to the right hand side. And across the top of the wave, there's the bit where I call it the cascade, where the water is tipping over. Again, take a little bit of paint on my brush. And this tends to look a little bit like a dip or a curve, like so. So this is where water is crashing over onto the beach. Okay, you can start to see a wave now. This is the point where the water is going up into the wave, and it is steepest in here, and it is shallowest over here. See, everything is building up and then flipping over. Now, I'm trying not to over brighten all of this because obviously I still want to paint my lovely seascape, but get this kind of image. If you can take a little screenshot of this, this shape is a classic shape. And if you can say, take a little screenshot of this and remember it. So when you're painting your waves, if you can get this lovely sort of shape going, then you're almost guaranteed to do a lovely seascape. And of course, this point of the painting or the wave is called the eye of the wave. And it's where the water becomes transparent and the light comes shining through. Right now though, well, it's covered in a lot of dark coloured paint, and that just won't do. So here's a neat little tip. Rather than trying to fight through a ton of dark paint, just get your finger, just kind of smudge it out a little bit, and just take away some of the excess paint. There we go, just wipe it off with your finger, and that way when you try and do the eye of your wave, it'll stay nice and bright. Now we know where the main wave is, we can figure out what's going to happen in the background. We want some small background wave, just for a little bit of context obviously. Now things close to the horizon line and coming forward, because we're looking along, almost straight at it, everything's going to be very compressed. In other words, you're not going to see much of a gap between one wave and another. It's another one of those perspective things. So I'm going to put in just a little bit of wave detail back in there. And to do that, well, you've got a number of different ways of doing it. Obviously a brush. Bob did his with a liner brush to start with. One of my favourites is one of these dagger brushes. I quite like using those. And this old brush, well, this used to be a fan brush, which I cut down. It's not much good for doing fine detail, but it makes smashing splashes and crashes. So let's put on some background detail. And I'm going to start off by using a little liner brush. And if you've still got some liquid clear, you can take a little bit of that on your liner brush. Roll it through. You want to thin down some paint. And I'm going to take just a little bit of this grubby white colour. Just a tiny touch. And trust me, that is super bright. It may not look it, but it really is a very bright colour. Notice how I roll my brush through the paint, draw my brush to a point. Now, the light in the background sea is going to be brightest sort of just about here, so that's where I'm going to concentrate my work. And as I say, I want just these little kind of looping strokes for the background, some little bits of distant wave, and of course there's yellow under there, so it means when I do this, my paint should turn a nice bright yellow colour as well. Let's say these waves are all just slightly sloping downhill to follow the line of this wave. I'm just going to touch that up and come right up under that. There. Now then, the next little wave down, I'm going to leave a little bit more of a gap. And again, maybe just put a little bit more of a lump and a bump in it. Okay, you can see that little bit of yellow coming through. It's going to get a little bit tight there. It's going to appear on the other side. Now here's a top tip for you. This wave is the focal point. Next to the sky, this wave wants to be the next thing you see. So we don't want our background water to be really bright, especially around this area, and around this area, and around this area. We want this wave to come forwards, so we don't want to be fighting over a lot of bright colour. It's the reason why I say we don't really want a nice bright white colour. In fact, I might almost tone that down a bit. There we go, just make it look a little bit grubbier. Okay, and then we can work on the next little wave down just in here. And notice how my gaps are getting a little larger. We'll let that disappear there, and I don't even think we're going to see it here. This might just disappear into the background. Here's where we can decide which brush we want to use, a fan, a dagger, maybe even a filbert brush. But I want to think about how these represent the tops of waves. In other words, the light coming across the water, and it's the splash and the crash, one of these waves all the way back there. I want to keep the top nice and bright, but the gap between, well, that wants to get a little bit darker. Let's use my dagger brush here and just going to take some of this colour. I'm going to take it backwards to the wave behind. And so you use whichever brush you like for this process. But I'm hoping you can see that. Let's put a bit more colour. So this is going to be the top of the wave. I should have started with a dagger brush, shouldn't I? And this is going to be the water going back behind it. It drops into a little trough. It's flat water, and then it comes up to meet the wave behind it. Okay, so it's going down into a trough and then it's coming up. Save a little dark in there as well. Remember, this is all flat back here. and then it slowly goes up. There, so now you can sort of see I'm getting my little wave shape in, up a little bit of a lift. Remember what I said, keep this area behind the wave a little bit darker. And of course this wave has to have the same thing going on. This is the crest of the wave, and as it goes backwards, it stays flat. See now why you can do this with a little flat dagger brush so beautifully. But you use whatever brush you have to hand. And little by little, you can start to see the shapes of my waves forming. Touch and flick it round. And this, of course, is going to be another wave just in here. I don't want to miss that bit out on the horizon. I will give that a little touch of colour, a little bit of a wave shape as well. There. So now you can start to see the shapes of my waves. Now, it's not always obvious, because what sometimes happens is these waves look like they're going that way, and this wave looks like it's going this way. And this is where you need to get a little bit of paint on your liner brush and start to work in a little bit of detail. If I put some shapes in like this, some curves and some curls, then you'll start to see my waves start to head in the right direction. So you can start to see my waves starting to form. They're going this direction. And these little shapes are very important that you put them on. And remember, between that wave and this wave, there is some distance. And you have to have them sort of coming down at an angle and then curving round nice and flat. There you go, there's a nice bright one for you. But what we want to avoid doing is this, going from the top of that wave to that wave there. Can you see that makes it look like this wave is standing on that one's shoulders? Doesn't quite work, does it? No, you have to remember that from that wave over to this wave is a little bit of a distance. That's why you need this little curve. Get down into the base of that wave before it meets the back of the one in front of it. And as soon as you get this idea kind of in your kind of painting skill set, then suddenly you will start to see your waves working out a little bit better. I'm going to carry on adding some details through here, and I'll do a little bit of time lapse for that. So as you can see, I've added in some detail. I've concentrated on the brightest area being roughly here, directly under the bright spot in my sky, and I let the colours become darker to the sides. In here, obviously, there was lots of lovely yellow colour, so that reflects nicely. And over here, you can see I started to pick up a little bit of the purpley colours. So we started to sort of change colours we've worked down. But I want to do the eye of the wave next. And as I say, you want to remove some of the surplus paint in there, because otherwise it ends up becoming really muddy. The eye of the wave doesn't want to be pure white, because if it is, it becomes like a big searchlight, almost like a big beacon. And you want to choose a brush. You can either use your finger, which I often do, or use a filbert brush. And I'm going to just tint it with a little touch of the Indian yellow colour. So it's white with a hint of Indian yellow. Let you see that. Okay, and so just a hint. Pure white is too bright. Here's a little tip for you. Around the top edge, just under that foamy crest, you want to leave a little gap. I call it the mascara line. It's sort of like a shadow line for the wave. And if you go up too close to it, then this all ends up being mushed together. So my brightest spot is going to be in here. And I'm going to just sit my brush in really firmly. I'm just going to wiggle it at the canvas. Okay. You want to just really get that in there. Now you can see that little dark line there. Now as you do this, you're going to pick up colour. Okay, so you just want to really push it down into the canvas. Okay. Now, as you do this, you're going to move away from the top and you're going to start working away and you're going to start bumping into other colours. There's going to be some lavender in here, there's going to be some blue in here, and you're going to get it on your brush. What you don't want to do is pick that colour up and take it back up. So as you start working down, don't go back to the top. And as I say, I'm just pushing colour into the canvas right now. I'm going to blend this all in a minute. So this is just the first part. See, I'm just doing these little kind of brush strokes. Okay. It doesn't matter whether you go clockwise or anti-clockwise. Ah, you see, I start bumping into a little bit of blue now. Blue and that lovely yellow colour is going to give me some nice pretty greens, I hope. Okay, so you see, you really got that colour in there nicely. And here you want a nice clean dry brush. This one's a bit old and crunchy, but it'll do the job. And you want to blend with just these few hairs on the corner. And I might move my camera around a bit so you can see a little easier. Okay, right upon that corner, you want just a few hairs. And as I say, you just want to do some little circles. I described this as being like a little dancer pirouetting on the spot. And those few little bristles are just touching the canvas. And they're just spinning on the spot. You can see what happens, it starts to blend. See just those few little hairs. That's all I'm doing. And blend this and get it super smooth. Now when you start doing this, if this doesn't look bright enough, if it looks like it doesn't have quite enough brightness to it, you can always add a little more colour to that and then blend again before you start moving away. But as I say, be careful not to over brighten this. It can look a little fake, a little too bright. I'm kind of really on the edge here with this brightness. It probably would never be this bright, I don't think. So I'm going to keep blending this out. Now, a little trick I like to do, but again, this is really up to you, is to just use not the blue in that I've been blending with, but use the other corner, just to take your brush and just kind of sculpt the wave a little more. Remember, up in here, it's very steep, so you want a nice curve. Over here, it's getting flatter. Now, I start in here, I give it a little touch, a little pressure, and kind of just pull the paint around. Pull that around. Now you're going to pick up blue when you do this, so you've got to be gentle. There we go, so it kind of starts to form the shape of my wave. We can now come back in here and add in all the little details, but first I want to do this little piece here, the cascade. That's next. I've loaded my fan brush with some grubby white, touch of Indian yellow, just to kind of warm things up a little tiny bit. Remember, the light coming across here is going to strike the top of this cascade, so this is going to be shiny, but as soon as it comes over that edge and goes down here, we're dropping into shadow. Remember, this is sort of an evening time, or maybe the crack of dawn time, so I want to come across and I'm going to just let my brush fall. Remember, this is the line I'm following, so dropping, 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 and then going out to the side a little more. So follow the line, top of the wave, lean on that brush, really press in, and then just let the brush fall. Okay, you're going to pick up colour when you do this. Press, let the brush fall, and just let it overlap the previous one. You're going to pick up colour, touch it off on a piece of tissue, just knock it off a little bit, and reload. So just not pure white. And go along and then just let it drop. Save all of these lovely colours in here. There's a whole bunch of colours in here. And I don't mind all these little crunchy edges here. I really don't mind them. I think they look kind of cute. You don't have to do lovely tidy waves. It's not like it has to be groomed into perfection. Okay, and then I'm going to just drop in one more. I think like just a little bit more light on the end there. Look at that. And look at all this lovely shadow in here that I saved. In fact, there's probably a little bit more shadow in here than I actually need, but that's okay. Because now I want to put on some foam. And again, I'm going to use my fan brush for this. White, grubby white. And I'm going to use the corner of my fan brush. I'm going to make some little circular strokes. Now you can use a fan, you can use a filbert, any brush you like, but I prefer a fan brush. Just remember, you have to lead the brush across. You can't push it across. So let's start at the top here and just do some little flicks of paint. Give that little kind of push. You see the importance of that little mascara line there. You can also see why I didn't want this to be too bright. Otherwise this foam won't show up. And this line's a little bit straight, and from habit, I like to kind of drop it down a little bit. Again, it's just one of those little kind of ways I paint my waves. I don't want them to be perfect and straight. There we go. Just pushing and pressing. And you can always add a little push here and there. Kind of explosion. Now knock off that excess paint. My brush is getting really grubby. More grubby white. Okay, and down this side of the wave you're going to have to lead your brush again. And just as we do, I want to stay just above that grey line there, that little shadow line. As we come down here, I think they're going to be bigger splashes and crashes. I'm going to just lead my brush that way. There we go. There we go. So you can get these lovely kind of splashes and crashes. And as I come down in here, I try and come in underneath this shadow. There's a lot to remember in this little painting, isn't there? But take your time with it. Okay, take your time. I've been down into the blue-grey colours down in here. And you see all that lovely little bits of shadow back in there? See how important that is? This all happens to work together. Knock off the excess again. And once again, look at my colour of my paint. Grey and grubby. No white paint here. Topping up that Indian yellow. Now, if you want to come back in, you can add a few little pops of light. It looks like the sun's coming in through there. And down in here, a little blend. I want to blend the inside edge of this, because this is like a little fat roll of water, and the only brush I've got is this one. I'm going to dry clean it, and I don't mind if there's a little blue-grey on here, a little bit of mauve, that's absolutely fine. But here I want to blend that little inner edge, and you want to just tickle that inner edge. Make a little shadow, and you can see that mascara line. There's a little bit of paint there. I've been painting waves so many years now, I can't remember when I even started. I've been painting waves, and this, trust me, is one of the nicest ways you can learn to paint a classic wave shape. just want to go up and down into this foam a little bit. Don't kill all those little sparkles. And as they just tease this round. There we go. And as I go over in here, you can pick up some of the paint from the background that's still wet. There we go. Don't forget, down in here is all down in shadow, and you can spend a nice few minutes just blending this out. There we go. So there we are. It's one nice wave. Now you can come back in here and you can add to this wave. You can come back in here and you can fine tune this if you want to. You can come back and add little more pops of light. All good fun, but don't overdo it. Don't overdo it. Okay. What tends to happen is this tends to get really huge. It sticks up too far. It kind of looks odd. If you want to, is you can add more splash and crash. So when you've blended that out a little bit, you can come back in here and you can put in a little more foam. Just kind of let it kind of run, a bump. Yeah, we'll have a nice rock in there. And again, you can blend a little bit out behind it. Oh, look at that. Let's save these lovely darks. There we go. What do you think? Fun wave, huh? Right, let's add some more detail. We need to do a reflection on a beach. And I don't know if you can see there's a sort of a patch of yellow-green colour here. I want this eye of wave to reflect onto my beach. I want this to be like a mirror, okay, or like a light coming through. And I followed the line really from the background through the eye of my wave onto the beach. And this is called a light trail. In other words, the light passes through an object, past an object onto the beach. And that line is quite important really, because if you had this bright spot being sort of down here, then the line wouldn't be continuous, it would be at a funny angle. So I've moved a little bit of yellow colour over into here. I just wiped the canvas off, put a little bit of Indian yellow into there, and I dry clean that brush. And this is one I did blending with, so it's pretty clean. And I'm going to go into some white, little touch of Indian yellow. I want this to be a bright shiny colour. Okay, a bright shiny colour. Might be a little too bright. I don't know. We'll see. And I'm going to go into that little patch there, and I'm going to just touch, and I'm going to press, and I'm going to pull straight down. Whew, look at that. And the idea is I'm going to work away from that. Okay, and I'm going to be picking up blue, and it's going to go green. So some of these greeny colours here are going to get reflected down to the beach. But don't go back into that, you'll kill it. And all of that colour will be lost. There we go, look at that. Now, between here and there, we need to put in some nice effects, some nice ripples, and lots of other little details. And that'll all get kind of fixed up in its own way. So I don't worry about it too much. But I'm going to just knock off this paint. There's a lot of colour in here now. And I'm going to just brush across. And I'm going to start here first, because as I brush across, I'm going to pick up more and more colour. I could probably do with a little bit more paint in here, but we'll get to that. So you just lay your brush, you can lay it on an edge. You get a little bit more of a concentrated sort of blur, or you can lay it flat, whichever you wish. I think I might go flat today. And just lay it on there, pull. And see how that kind of just merges slightly. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to pull from the other direction. And then I'm going to come down a little bit and I'm going to go the other way. It's kind of a wobble. Okay. I think that's really pretty, isn't it? Do you think I need a little bit more colour? I think we could. I think we could. Let's pick up another little bit of white. Thinking yellow, maybe make it a little more grubby. I think we could just kind of add a little more light to this. And that's not kind of green yellow, is it? But oh, let's have a think about how this might look. Yeah, let's put a little bit of colour in there too. So it looks like maybe this piece of foam here. Wow, look at that. So as you're painting, think about how things, reflections might work, how you might kind of get an effect to look good on your painting. Not everything has to be kind of done all in one go and never retouched again. I'm thinking about this lovely bright colour here. I think that's the eye of the wave. Then maybe we could put a few little touches of light over in here. Yeah, I think it looks kind of cool. Dry clean my brush. And this gently, I'm going to just gently brush this. Blur it a little bit. Blur it a little bit. Okay, now under the studio lights, this doesn't show up nearly half as bright as it does in real life. This is a lot brighter, and the studio lights tend to kill the colours a little bit. So I'm going to take a couple of stills of this next, and I'm going to bring them up and put them up on screen for you. The next stage is to add some rocks to my painting. I want to sort of hold my wave in a little bit. There's also some detailing to put on the beach here, some sort of surf lines that have gone come up. It's a bit of a juxtaposed position. What comes first, chicken or egg, rock or surf? Well, I think in this case I'm going to put the rocks on, then try and fit the surf around it. Now, I know that I'm going to get hauled over the coals for this, because I always tell people, look, don't sacrifice, doing the right thing with your painting because you've got a little piece of the painting you really love. And I was going to put a nice big rock on this corner, but I can't help but thinking that I really like this little piece of foam, the way it's kind of kicking up. It looks really lovely, and I think I want to try and keep it. So I'm actually going to just sneak a little piece of rock in here, maybe that sort of kind of fills this little corner, somewhere like that. So it is actually going to fit around what's happening here in terms of lovely foam. And I'll put a nice big rock on the other corner there, where I'm not too worried if I lose some of this foam. So that's the next little step, is to paint in some rocks. And for this I'm going to use a palette knife, but you could easily use a fan brush. And I've put out some very dark brown for this. I'm not sure I'm going to use black, I'm just going to use the very dark brown. I'm going to just take a little bit of that paint on my palette knife, very firm and very stiff. You definitely don't want this to be thick and oily. And as I say, I'm going to just sneak this little rock in here. It's going to just breach the horizon line. I wanted to cut that off, and I'm going to have it as though it sort of fits in between these little bits of crashing water. This is like a little stack, and I'm going to have this coming through and down, sort of down below the line of the surf. So I know this, as I say, I shouldn't really do this. I should say, darn it, put my rock in there and live with what I do. But I really like that little bit of surf there. So I'm going to just kind of squeeze this in here on the corner. Now, top tip, if it does look wrong, I won't have any problems with just painting across that little piece of surf. It'd just be one of those things. But I'm going to give it every chance. And as I say, I'm going to put in a nice rock over on this side here. So this is going to be the main rock in my little painting. Not everything has to be super craggy. So maybe this rock is a little smoother. This little rock's kind of partly engulfed in the wave, I think. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring some of the wave over the edge of the rock. So it's going to cover up my decision. So I'm going to kind of go a little bit like this. And remember, I'm coming down below that line in the beach. That's where the floor of the wave is. These are actually on the beach. There could be more than one level. You could have several sections to it. You could have one level there, another level there, and another level there. Paint there. Ooh, that looks a bit kind of grubby, doesn't it? Let's put a little hint of blue in with it, a little touch of Indian yellow. Colour I'm looking for is a sort of a turquoisey kind of colour. Yeah, something like that I think would work quite good. And maybe just a little bit, something a bit more yellow green, yellow gold. There we go. So I've just got a little bunch of different colours there. There's a little dark sienna there as well. Look at that. So I've got a real kaleidoscope of colours to go for here. Just wipe my palette knife. And I think I'll do this rock first. So I'm going to start with the bit that I think is going to catch the light. So I'm going to go for some of this slightly light gold, orangey, sort of goldy brown, green, goldy green colour. Right, super light touch, light coming this way, and just let the paint stick where it touches. There we go, just let it kind of stick where it touches. And if it doesn't stick, add a little bit more paint to your palette knife and add some of that. These nice turquoisey colours. Look at that. That's a bit eye-popping, isn't it? Again, just let it kind of blend in a little bit. I think that might be a wee bit bright, but I don't know. It looks kind of fun. Again, I hasten to emphasise that what you see on camera and what I see in real life, this looks like super bright. When I look at I've got a little monitor just there, and I look at it, I think it doesn't look very bright at all. So I have to balance up what I'm doing a little bit by eye. So I'm sometimes painting for the camera more than I'm painting for what I like. So let's put on a little pop of highlight, just coming through there. Which looks like a cake, doesn't it? Sort of icing on top, bit of blue in the centre, a bit of brown at the base. Does it look realistic? Well, I don't know. Not convinced. Let's take out some of that turquoise. It looked a little bit fake. We'll get rid of some of that. And we'll go more with the sienna and white mixture. I think that looks a little more realistic. And again, just drag this through. I think that looks a little bit better, folks. See, you just make decisions and you just go with it. But if there is one top tip I am going to say is essential, it's to stand back. Paint your rocks. Leave them alone, stand back and have a look at them from the other side of the room before you make any kind of decision, because it's only from there that you can really say yes or no, they work or they don't. And I think sometimes we can judge our paintings from sort of 4 or 5 inches away and get them wrong. You know, I've done that many a time myself. It doesn't look quite right either, does it? No, bright yellow definitely doesn't fit my rocks. Now you saw in that last little sequence that I sat back and I played with this rock and it grew and it grew and it grew and it got more and more and more ugly until eventually, no, enough. I take the palette knife to it and I just take it off and I start again. I use some of the brown colour that I scraped off to do the base colour for the rock. I repaired the beach and put a little bit of phthalo blue on there again, and I've gone back to using a more familiar colour, which is titanium white with a little bit of yellow ochre. I'm afraid the Indian yellow colour is too transparent, even with white. Nah, it wasn't working for my painting. And I've gone back to, say, an old familiar, which is, say, yellow ochre, touch of white, and I'm going to use that just to add some little touches of highlight. And immediately I feel back on a colour that I know works well, a combination which has served me many good times to do rocks, and it just works great on a seascape. It's the yellow ochre is just that lovely sort of rich colour that my painting needs, not the Indian yellow. That was far too lemon and far too transparent. So, and as you see, I also switched out using a palette knife, and I decided that I would rather use a brush. It just gives me a slightly different look, and I really like the effect of using a brush sometimes. You see how I barely hold it and I just let it drag. Sometimes you can do some amazing techniques with a palette knife, with a brush that I struggle with a palette knife. And I can just do these little delicate highlights, and I find that sometimes I can do better rocks this way. And again, I'm thinking about how the light would come across and hit these rocks, but I don't want to grow them too big. So I'm going to leave these alone, and I'm going to start working on the surf. So I took a moment just to tidy up my palette. I was getting at a bit of a pickle. For my surf, I want to use some white. I use a little bit of phthalo blue. Now, you have to be a little careful here. I have to dull this down a little bit. I think I might take a little lift my crimson there, just make it a little bit more lavender. And I'll show you what I mean. That's it, just knock the brightness off that. Because, say, this is either a sunrise or a sunset. I think it's more likely a sunset. And down on here, we don't want bright sort of surf. We want this to be kind of subdued. And as I say, I've knocked the white down with some phthalo blue and some lavender. I spread it out very flat. I slide my knife up and get a little bit of this colour. And I'm just going to take just the tiniest little roll. Let's see what this looks like. Now, the trick is that you can work from here, this direction. Which you can't do those, you can't start here and work that direction. This technique only works if you're working away from the wave. You can't start here and work the paint back. It doesn't work that way. So I'm going to just come back off the corner of this little rock. I'm going to imagine that the surf is just kind of coming up the beach. And I'm going to let this paint mix with what's already on the beach. Now that's pretty bright. Pretty bright. Is it too bright? Oh, it's looking a little bit that way. Darken it down a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit too blue. I don't know. Let's try. Let's try. Okay. Now we've got something a little bit less intense. And so the idea is we want to sort of work our way across the surf. So I want to try and leave that little piece alone. And the idea is to leave ourselves a little surf line, a little line of paint. Looks like a wave that came up the beach. Okay. Now I'm going to use a fan brush, and just this back edge, I'm going to just grab this and just pull this back. Okay, so this is what happens to a wave once it's already crashed up the beach and it's rolled back. This looks a bit too electric blue, doesn't it? Looks a bit kind of crazy blue. Oh, I'll fix that in a second, don't worry. But you see what I'm doing is I'm leaving this front edge alone, and I'm just grabbing the back edge and pulling it back. As you see, it kind of looks like a sort of water that's sort of laying on the surface of the beach. And what can we do about this crazy blue colour? I think what I need to do is get back in with a little crimson. Pick up your palette knife and scrape it off. Whoops, I'm scraping down through the gesso there. Just take it off, just scrape it away. My fan brush, just blend that out. No, and I'm pleased these things happen. Anybody else might be kind of thinking, ooh, this doesn't look like a great demonstration, but do you know something? It's good that you see the trials and tribulations, you see the challenges of painting, because if you don't see kind of me having a battle sometimes with my paintings, then, well, you might think that everything is just supposed to float along very easily for everybody. And if you're struggling, then you might be thinking, well, it's obviously just me. And it's kind of harsh, isn't it? If you think so, well, it's just me that kind of can't get it right. Let me tell you, everybody, and I mean everybody I ever met that paints makes mistakes. And anyone who says they don't, well, they're not really working hard enough. So I've gone in for a little bit more of a lavender colour. I think it's a little bit more realistic. It's not quite as vibrant. Electric blue colour. And you see I'm using that little zigzag. You see how I'm working way across the beach. And again, just take that fan brush and just want to grab this sort of raggedy edge back here. Just give it a little flick. And I like to leave some of these little bits of detail in here. I think it's quite fun. There we go. There we are, some lovely purple surf. They're kind of coming from the sky. We don't really want to see a lot of bright light on the beach. I'm actually squeezing paint out the toe of my knife. Okay. Let me show you what happens if you go the other way. So I put a little bit of paint on my knife. I'm going to work from here. I'm going to work that direction. I'm going to work up. So you start like that and you start rubbing and absolutely nothing happens. But as soon as you kind of come the other direction, yeah, that's right, it starts working. Okay, so you can only go one direction with that. Seascapes, you would do them very nice, neat and straight, but if it bothers you, you can always pick up a little piece of paint and you can come back in there and kind of mess with this a little bit, kind of break these up a little bit more, which is something I like to do. I like to kind of come back and mess with them and kind of break them out a little bit more. You've got some kind of nice, interesting sort of shapes there. I think that looks a little more realistic if you kind of do that on the beach. Yeah, you kind of break them up. There we go. Okay, I think we are there. I might put a little detail in here. Not much, just a little suggestion of surf that comes across the beach and up into here. For the final details, I go in with my liner brush, some of this nice lavender colour, maybe a bit bright still. And this is really just to put in a little bit of the foamy detail I've got in here, but it's up on the beach. And of course, remember, it's all in shadows in here, so I don't want this to be too bright. And so this has got to follow the line of my wave. It could be steeper in here and shallower in here. Again, I'm just looking for just the suggestion of a little bit of surf. It doesn't have to be too bright. And if it gets too bright, well, you can always take a brush and just kind of press it down into the painting and dissolve it a little bit. Now, things to remember about adding these sorts of details to waves. Remember that this detail actually comes from all the way over here. Okay, because remember this flat beach. So you can't come from this point to there because this is much closer to you and this wave is further back. So keep that one in mind when you're doing these little details, that you don't kind of mess up that perspective, that thing that we were working on. For an extra bonus point, I've got some titanium white here and I've got it mixed with the smallest amount of yellow ochre. So it's white with a hint of yellow ochre, literally just the smallest hint. It makes a colour nicknamed Seascape white. And If you really want to, you can come back in and add in just a few little pops of splash and crash to your waves. So just give it that little extra something. But once again, don't overdo it. Just kind of see how that kind of makes your wave just light up a little bit extra. And with that, I think I've finished painting. So there you have it, a wonderful colourful seascape based upon the Bob Ross classic Crimson Tide. Including the little mistakes I made, I had a lot of fun and you will do too. But don't move because there's some more lovely video for you to watch coming right along. I might even say the words right next time. Happy painting, people. Oh, I'll have to scrape that one off as well, I suppose.